this is what we're going to do today. I'm going to give you some introductory material, and actually introduction barely says it. I'm going to be talking about some of the overview, bigger, some of the context around doing a mock site visit. I will then go into the kind of describe it as a methodology of rating a standard. Just so you understand that, you may not actually go that far with your own mock site visits. You may simply, we got it, we don't have it, we look really, really good, or we don't look that good. We think we're going to pass, we don't think we're going to pass. But just so you know, and maybe you do want to take it to that higher level, but so we'll go over that. And then I'm going to go over how to look at different types of evidence and different standards areas from the perspective of a peer, like basically what are you looking for as far as implementation, what should you be looking for, and it's not just about a mock site visit, too, so by talking about that for what you should be looking for with your peer hat on, I'm also going to be talking about and giving you some heads up about what to look for or what to prepare as you and how to prepare as you prepare your self-study. Just one more thing with Jacqueline. All right. So let's start to look at this. So take a look at the slide, or just listen. I hate to talk over the slides sometimes because if you're reading, you're not listening, and if you're listening, you may not see the slide. But it may be the best way to approach this and these trainings generally is listen primarily and use the slides you have as for taking notes. And then if I say something that, about the slide that really draws your attention, turn your attention to it. Because I'm not really saying, I'm saying more than what's on the slide, but it's really not good for learning and memory to be reading the same thing I'm talking about. But there's a number of good reasons to conduct a mock site visit, I think. And the one you always think about is to gauge your readiness for the site visit itself and to see where you are in the preparation. Now, from that perspective, this doesn't need to be something you do once. It could be something you do informally at different points in the process, or you can take the methodology I am talking about, or will be talking about, and apply it at different points in your preparation process, right? Preparing your staff, that's another real biggie. Staff are going to be very involved. Many staff will be interviewed, they may be observed, and overall, you want to try, if you can, to the extent that you can, create a level of comfort and, just try to deflate some of the stress that's likely to be building up, leading up to a site visit. And there's also, we talked about your readiness. That is from the standards implementation perspective. There's also making sure you're ready from the logistical perspective. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, but this is really important too. The on-site evidence is organized, right? Things are easy to locate. People know what their roles are. I don't know if you always know this ahead of time, right? But all that documentation in the on-site documents column in those tables of evidence need to be pulled together and organized and placed in the room where the peer team is going to be working. It's not something that, okay, they'll ask for it, and as in each point in time that they need it, they'll ask for it and somebody will go get it. No, you got to pull all this together and organize it. So these are things to be thinking about and testing, right? Now, I don't think there's any better way to prepare and conduct a mock site visit than to yourself become a peer reviewer. So bring your attention, we'll go back to the screen. You should see the feedback window, right? And I want to know, yes or no, are you a COA peer reviewer? I'll give people a moment. We got about a 50% response so far. Okay. Just over 50%. So I'll give people another. Okay, looks like. Okay, we still have a couple of people who haven't responded. Well, I don't need to hammer home the point about how useful it might be in this process to have a peer reviewer, right? And it looks like we have one person who was trained as a reviewer, hasn't yet been on a review, but that her organization has an advantage over those of you who do not have a peer reviewer on staff. If you're going through this process for the first time, and you're in process, then you can't do that. You can't have one of your people become a peer reviewer now. I think the rules are a little bit relaxed about that. If you are getting reaccredited and you are in process, and I'm not sure where the parameters are, I do believe that someone can become a reviewer, and it's a huge advantage in every way with the accreditation process. Now, one thing I will recommend is if you do not have a peer reviewer on staff to assist you, you might want to find out if there is a organization, a COA accredited organization locally who has a peer reviewer, or if you're in a network like Catholic Charities or the Alliance, maybe there's somebody you could borrow, because again, it would be a huge advantage. But I'm approaching this training from the perspective of you don't have a peer reviewer, so do keep it in mind. Big advantage, okay? Now let me review briefly what's going to happen, okay, when the team is on site. They'll come in over the weekend. Site visits officially, in all circumstances that I'm aware of, begin Monday morning, okay? They will come in Saturday or Sunday morning, and they will do, we call it Sunday afternoon case record review, but really they try to look at the on-site documents, okay? They want to try to look at as much of that documentation as they can, so that when the site visit itself begins, they can focus on interviewing staff and observing programs in operation and looking at facilities and those kinds of things. The more they can find out how well you meet the standards on paper, which is what the self-study documents do and what the on-site documents do, then they can really, they can have a really good sense of how well you're working and how well things look on paper, and then that becomes verified through the interviews and the other on-site activities. Okay, keep that in mind. Okay, and then the typical review, site review is 2 to 3 peers for 2 to 3 days. And so during the time of the official, there'll be an entrance meeting on Monday morning where they, explain what's going on, what's going to happen. You can invite who you want. You should invite certainly all your senior staff and at least your board chair, if not some other board members who may be able to come, and anybody else, anybody who is on the schedule formally to be interviewed if possible. And anybody else you want to have there. And then, as I said, they'll then spend their time interviewing staff and looking at programs, and then they may want more documents, They may want to visit more sites than are on the schedule. All these things are possible. And then the end of the last day, the middle of the last day, they will submit their ratings to COA. And the team leader is not allowed to leave your site until they've done that. So that'll be part of what you talk about when you're setting the site visit up. So one of the things, the approach you want to take is trying to put yourself in the shoes of a peer reviewer. And that shouldn't be that difficult. The peers, in some ways, are you. We draw our pool of volunteer peer reviewers from accredited agencies. And we're looking, there are qualifications. I think that 7 years experience in with programs and in management. I don't actually have all of that information, but we're looking for people experienced in delivering and overseeing the services, as well as people who have been through the process. Okay, so they are you. There are people like you from programs doing these reviews, and they get the training. You want to be objective, right? The reviewers, their role, they don't decide whether you're accredited or not, right? Their role is to objectively look at the evidence and then look at the standard and make an assessment as to, use their professional judgment as to whether the standard's met or not and to what extent it's met. And what they're looking for and what you should be looking for in all circumstances is implementation. The piece of paper that upon which the policy or procedure is written is not itself enough to get you a passing rating. So you will be looking for evidence that procedures are in effect, and generally that the standards has now become the routine, how you do business routinely. That you've adopted the standards as part of your organizational culture. Now, we do have a list of accredited agencies on our coanet.org information website. And it should be toward, if you go there, you'll see on the left side is a long list of, links to other parts of the website. And toward the bottom, it says who is accredited. And when you go there, you click on a flag. You probably click on the U.S., and then you click on a state, and then you can see who the accredited agencies are. So that's the way you would want to do that. So you've got your peer hat on. Now, how are you going to organize this, and what's your approach going to be? There's a couple of ways to do this, and they both have their advantages. You might want to do them different times in different ways. You can use a single team, right, as the way a peer review team will be organized. The advantage is that will bring consistency, and so the same people looking at the standards and the evidence will rate things, ideally, in a consistent way. You could also make a lot of different teams and have different parts of the, different groups of your staff review different sections and do that evaluation. And that may be useful early. I mean, it's really you gotta make that judgment, and maybe you'll only do one or the other. Involving more staff makes it more fun. It can make bring more participation. Can lower the stress level. You can start to get a sense of what reviewers might be looking at in the detail, and overall, the more fun you can make this, the better it's going to be. You don't want to raise alarms. You don't want to freak staff out or make them stressed out or nervous, especially close to the site visit. Even if you're finding stuff that you're not happy with, take that back and discuss it and come up with a plan for addressing issues, as opposed to making some sort of public announcement that the group living programs are really not doing well, and those kinds of things. You want to have as much as you can the staff be upbeat as they go into the site visit, because, as you know by now, the site visit is not the end of the day here, right? In some ways, you can look at. I look at the site visit as the reality check. Okay, after the site visit, you know where you stand in relation to implementing the standards. And most agencies have things they still need to work on, and that's just part of the process. You'll get your ratings, and then you will have at least several weeks in which to prepare a response to ratings that were not passing, right, 3s and 4s. Right, so you get the reality check, you know what to focus on, you focus on it, submit your response, and that goes into the decision-making process. And I would like, if you have any questions about the site visit or after the site visit, please let me know, and I'll see if I can answer those. I think those are areas that I'm coming to learn that you don't actually get talked to very much about it. You sort of, get into the site visit part of the process, and some of you are given a detailed overview of the process, and some apparently aren't. And then when you get after the site visit, it becomes really murky sometimes. So let me know if you have any questions. Now, in your role as a peer reviewer, there are some tools you should be using or can be using. There's a number of tools that the peer teams have or they can use that we've made available to you through the Tools Index, and also in some of them can be found in the accreditation guidelines. So use them, right? The case record checklist, the facility observation checklist, the board minutes, personnel records. These are all tools that you can use, and some of these other ones you can adapt, okay? So you're going to want to have some of this. Because these tools are one way to gather the evidence before you actually sit down and assign a rating to something, right? You're not going to assign a rating based on looking at 2 records. You're going to look at whatever sample of records you're going to look at. You're going to gather that information, take notes, whatever. Well, this is here, this isn't here, and this program, this other program doesn't have it, this other one does, and that's when you sit down and with the notes, with the information you've gathered, and assign a rating or make the assessment of where you stand. Okay? All right, let's talk about rating standards. Some of this, as I said earlier, might be advanced. You may not need actually to be thinking about the nuances of a 2 versus a 3, but I think it's useful for you to be exposed to this information in the approach. First of all of these contribute to a rating, okay? The standards and the evidence, obviously, and if you've taken my trainings, you know that I strongly advise that whenever you have the standards in front of you, you also have the evidence table printed out or however you want to do it. So that's important. And the rating indicators. So here's a question. I know some of you already know the answer to this because I have been asking this a lot lately, but do you know where to find the definitions of the ratings 1, 2, 3, and 4, which are called rating indicators, and the definitions are written out as in this sort of descriptions. Good. The number of you who are saying yes is increasing. This is, just vitally important to this process. So we'll take a quick little visit to the standards. We're going to the Tools Index. We're going into Over on the left, the third down, it's actually fifth says process tools. And the third and fourth documents are the definitions of the rating indicators. Okay, this is a document you have to have and have to know about. You know, and I can pull back from that. It's if you really want to understand how this is going to work and how the decisions are made, you really should understand what's on these documents. It's also again possible, you know, if you're going to take you know, going to pull back from your approach to doing your assessments and use a, yep, we're pretty close to what the standard says, or we're pretty far from what the standard says. That's legitimate also. But I think you, as the person whose job it is to get your organization accredited, should have these documents in front of you, and you should get a basic understanding of what they are and how they work. Now, here are the 4 ratings. 1s and 2s are passing, 3s and 4s are not passing. 1s generally mean that what the standard says, that's what you're finding or what the peers are finding. A 2 is good enough, meaning that there is a fairly, you know, substantial part of the standard is found. So in some cases you might have, let me just think of an example, a standard with a procedure that has 5 elements, A, B, C, D, and E. It may be that only 4 of those elements are present and 1 of them is not present. That may give you a rating of 2 as opposed to a 1. It's going to depend on the standard. It's going to depend on whether it's a fundamental practice standard or not, but that's typically a typical way in which a 2 can be given on a standard. Or if there's a standard that says something happens quarterly, and maybe a quarter is missed occasionally or late, then that might be a 2. So it's there. What's being asked for is in place, but maybe there's some challenges to it. It's not perfect. And a 3 typically means there is something there, but it needs a lot of help. And a 4 will typically mean you're pretty far from having met the standard. Okay, another question that I've been asking a lot. Do you know where to find the PQI rating guidance? Yes or no? Okay. Okay, we do have a fair number of no's. Okay. The PQI standards have their own special set of rating indicators, and these actually apply in addition to the regular rating indicators. These, I think, are one of the most important documents that we have to help you get accredited, because the peers use these, and for most organizations, you know, more organizations have difficulty with the PQI standards than any other section of standards. And the rating guidance is designed in part to demonstrate that there is a fair amount of flexibility in how the standards will be rated. Okay, so really important document. Is as important a document as almost any other document, I think, that we provide you. And print this out and staple it to, if you have a hard copy of the PQI standards, staple it, maybe even on the front. Anyway, and that's where you find it. Okay, this slide shows you, this is any page, any of the sections of the PQI standards that you open. You know, the related files are on the right, and it's in the middle of that list. Okay? If you have never seen these, as soon as this training is over, go and find them, print them out, and look at them. And it's just an example you can take a look at when you have a chance or for illustration purposes. Now, some standards are mandatory or required for reasons I don't understand. We don't like to use the word mandatory, but they are in fact mandatory. right? You have to be rated 1 or 2 on a number of standards in order to get accredited. Now, is that perfectly clear to everybody, how that works? Because that's vital. That's a vitally important piece of information. You need to understand that as you prepare. Okay, well, that's good. So 3 out of 5 of you said yes. I'm assuming the other 5 have got this one down. Okay. Now, let's take a look, get a little bit closer. Before you can assign a rating, and this will be whether, and this, again, I'm thinking bigger picture. I'm thinking you've gathered evidence and you're trying to do a global assessment across all of your programs. Okay, that's important to understand also, because there's 2 things that I don't know whether or not you are routinely informed about this that I want to make sure you understand too. The first is the stricter standard applies. So if your funding body has a standard, and we have a similar standard, and the funding bodies says you got to do things, I don't know, the funding body says 10 and we say 12, obviously 10 is the standard you are held to, and it's stricter than the COA standard. If the reverse is the case, then you are held to the COA standard. The stricter standard applies. Okay, keep that in mind. Second, if a standard is applied to multiple programs, and this would typically apply to standards in the management section and especially in the service delivery administration standards, let's say RPM 702. What does COA expect to see in case records? Okay, you've got 5 programs. The reviewers see 4 of them are excelling and getting 1s and 2s on that standard, but 1 of your programs is not excelling, is actually doing pretty poorly, and gets a rating of 3. So you've got 5 programs, 4 with 1s, 1 with 3. The rating you're going to get on that standard is 3. Okay? You want to understand that. That's not averaged out in any way. You know, the lower the program or the part of your organization that is the least, that is maybe not doing as well as others, that is a rating that will be applied. Okay, so long as I understand that. So what do you need to actually assign a rating? You need access to the standard, obviously. You need evidence. So these would be summaries of the interviews you've taken. You've used the case record review tool, and you've looked at however many records you've looked at, and you've gathered that information. You've taken notes from the documents, or you're actually looking at various documents. And from a reviewer, the reviewer would also have some additional information like the results of the stakeholder surveys. But so you need standards, you need the evidence, you need the indicators if you're going to go at that level, and you need rating sheets, which is someplace to write the rating. Now, for you, a hard copy of the standards is probably the best thing to use, right? Because you have the standard right there, and then you could put a rating right on in the margin somewhere. So, but you need these tools. Now, how do you actually rate the standard? This is how we teach about rating. Read the standard, determine its intent, then look at the evidence and assign a rating. Important to read the standard from the entire standard, from beginning to end, all the elements, and just make sure you go through it carefully. I have been in standards all my time here, I used to work full-time in standards, as you know, for 11 years, and I've been doing it still. I still have a number of standards projects. And I answer, when I'm not training, one of the primary things I'm doing is answering questions about the standards from staff and from peers, and because I have a lot of experience, I sort of have a fairly in-depth knowledge of the standards, and I've written a lot of them or been involved with the drafting of a lot of them. My policy is never to answer a question about a standard without looking at it and reading it. There's just so many different, any question can bring a take, a nuance to the standard that you hadn't thought about before. Also, it's important to read it carefully because we get a lot of questions about standards where, in fact, the answer to the question is actually in the standard, but the person didn't read it carefully enough, or in some cases didn't reach the end of a long standard. You'd be surprised how often the answer to a question we get is in the last 3 words of a standard. So read it carefully. Ask yourself, what does this standard want from us? What does COA want us to do or to implement? What is the standard asking us to do? Really important, and keep in mind that there's a lot of different ways to meet the standard, and in some cases there'll be different ways to meet the standard even within your own programs, right? Even within your own organization. The example I typically use is, take any standard in ETH. That standard, that language, applies to the 5-person counseling organization is equally to the 5,000-person gigantic public agency. Same words apply to both programs. The what is the same, the how is going to be a lot different. And that may be the case within your organization. You may have really large programs, you may have some really small programs, all the standards applying. So really you need to think about that. And if you have questions about that, talk to your coordinator, ask COA. So you read the standard, you have some idea what it's asking of you. You've looked at the evidence, so you know whether the conflict of interest procedure is actually implemented. The document itself meet the standard, and do the people who need to know what it's about know what it's about? And have you tested the procedures? Do you know if there's a question that comes up that you're not really sure about whether there's a conflict or not, how are you going to deal with that? Those kinds of things. And then you assign the rating. Ones and fours, if you're going to go to that level, are fairly easy. Again, based on the slide we saw a few minutes ago. You need this if you're meeting. If what you're doing is what's on the paper, that what the standard says, you're doing all of it, then you're going to get a 1. Or if you're just slightly off, you can still get a 1. And if you're really far away, you're looking at a 4. And again, for your purposes, maybe you're just rating 1 and 4. For this exercise, but the real difficulty can sometimes be differentiating between good enough and not really good enough. The peers, that is where the real work is, and that's where the team will get together and discuss things and get a general sense of, because the team as a whole will often help make those decisions rather than individual peers. For your purposes and for preparation purposes, I would err on the side of being strict. Okay? Don't take any chances, and especially if it's one of those mandatory standards that you have to get rated 1 or 2 on to get accredited. But generally, I think that's a good approach. Any questions about ratings and some of the thinking that's behind that? And while you're thinking about that, I just looked a little bit further and Zina's question about a list of accredited agencies. It doesn't list the services. It only lists the organization. And so at this time anyway, in the future when our new website is finally up and running, a review, a search of accredited agencies will also tell you what service sections, what standards, service standards they've been accredited for. But as right now, it's, and I would assume if you're in based on the size of your community, that you'd know who the other players are, the other organizations are in your community. It may not always be the case, but so all right. So I guess there's no questions about ratings. Was that useful? Was that something? Was that a useful discussion there about the thinking behind ratings? It's always, to me, a little. It's not always the easiest thing to talk about, I don't think, but all right, sounds good. It sounds like you've got, and I'm going to look at that whole this issue from a whole different angle later, when this afternoon when I do the assessing practices training. Okay. So what to look for? And this is not going to cover all the different types of evidence, all the different kinds of all the different things, and that a larger presentation on this topic could. But just to give you some ideas here about what to look for with your peer hat on, and on the other side of this, what to look for and what to make sure you prepare for, right? And this is actually still from the this slide is about being prepared. This is the on-site logistics of the site visit. We talked already about that the on-site documents need to be organized and placed in that room where the peer team is going to work. You do have to have a room where they can work in private with a lockable door. This is required. You have to have that. And so there's really no way around that. They are likely, the reviewers, to be asking for additional information at different points. So you need to think about how that's going to work. Just somebody who's going to run the case record room, or will that be you? Oftentimes it's the person who's the coordinator, the organization side, or at least is being the person who's going to be asked. So the review team will ask you whether, I don't know, whatever they want more case records or something, or they want additional, or they went to a program and then now even though things looked good earlier on Sunday, they want some additional information after conducting an interview with somebody. They may just ask you, and but you'll have to think, am I going to be running? Am I going to be getting the additional documents, or will somebody else be doing that for me? And so think about that and how that's going to work. As obviously, the smaller you are, it's not a big issue, but for larger organizations, it could become something you really have to organize. Are your case records electronically maintained or in hard copy? If you maintain documents electronically, you won't be, they're not going to ask you to print them out. This is especially true with things like case records or financial documents, unless certain reports can be printed out. That said, it might be much easier if your policies and procedures, although typically maintained on your server, right? Our procedures internally at COA are, I go into our S drive and look things up and print out forms and things. But I'm not sure you might, you're going to want to make enough computers available for all the peers to be able to look in your system, and you actually want them rooting around inside your in your S drive or whatever the shared drive is where you keep that. There's just some danger to that, right? So certain things you might want to print out. But if you have an electronic record-keeping system, for example, case record system, you don't have to print those things out. You know, they're going to need to look at it, and they're going to need to, you know, someone's going to need to be there with them, responding to their, you know, questions and showing them different case records. But that's a system that is electronic, you know, in its very nature, and and that sort of relates to the demonstration of the MIS system also. That's something that will be expected. And you know, when the reviewers are walking around, are you going to be walking with them? Will the program director, so if they go out to a group home, they go out to a site, you know, a counseling site or something, I'm assuming someone will be with them. And you know, there's going to be a number of peers, and there may be a lot going on. So you probably aren't going to be able to be everywhere with the team. So you want to make sure that people are aware that they'll be coming to this site. Someone's going to need to meet them and escort them around, et cetera, et cetera. Jacqueline, do you want to give me an example of some records that are electronic and some that are hard copy? Now, a huge part of the site visit is interviews of the board and staff. Okay, you want to try to prepare people. One of the things you want to try to prepare with the mock site visit is prepare staff for the interviews, and that is probably the single most useful thing you can a COA peer reviewer can do, whether it's in your organization or someone who's borrowed. Do the interviews, conduct the interviews. Now, the basic approach is this, okay? And this is the basic approach that I think you should take if you're doing it internally. Look at the core concept and turn the core concept into a question or questions. Listen to the response with your, you know, printed out hard copy of the standard of this section, and you know, when you hear a response that relates to the practice standards, make that note. Then, when the person's done, you follow up to fill in the gaps. Okay, that's the way that it's intended to go. I mean, different reviewers have different approaches, but I think that's a good approach. Not everyone, you know, these things don't have to be memorized, right? Staff are going to be asked. Typical staff will be asked generally what they know about the quality improvement PQI process and what their involvement is. And the reviewers will, to some extent, expect general answers, but the person in charge of PQI will be expected to have in-depth knowledge and probably should be able to talk about what's in the PQI plan without looking at it, right? Those kinds of things. So you want to tailor the questions to the level of responsibility and tailor the, you know, the expectation of what people need to know, right? In HR, there's a standard about having a personnel grievance procedure. Staff don't have to have that memorized. They should, you know, they need to know where to get a copy of it. They need to know that it exists, maybe some general information about it, but that kind of thing doesn't need to be memorized. If a person has a grievance to file, they need to know where to get it and go find it, and they need to be able to do that without talking to the person who may potentially be, you know, the person who a grievance will be filed against. So they should have their own access to certain documents without having to ask the supervisor for it. But these are the things, again, these are the things to be thinking about. And again, the point, even with interviews, is to acclimate them to the process. So just sitting down and talking to staff about, and having them talk about standards and different standards issues is it's going to hopefully what will help them to lower the stress level and, you know, be ready to answer questions when the team comes. The schedule will be filled with formal interviews with key staff, but also there'll be interviews with groups of staff, line staff, and direct service staff, and the reviewers are free and will stop staff that they see and ask them various questions as they walk around and do the facility reviews. So anybody can be interviewed as a staff member. It's possible. So here's a overview slide about implementation, and I have some other specific slides to follow. And so you can see, we'll talk about procedures in a moment. One thing you want to be cognizant of is time frames. Right? There are standards which say something should be done quarterly or annually, and there are standards where you are being asked to define a time frame, and when you do that, you will need to show that you're sticking to it, right? Most sections have service sections, and the assessment section have a standard that says that the organization defines the time frames for completion of assessments. That may vary from program to program, but you have to have that in your assessment procedures, and the reviewers will see that, and they will be looking to see that those assessments were done in those time frames when they look at your case records. Really important overall with PQI that you can show you've done something with the information you get. Not all PQI information will indicate that something needs to be done, but if you're looking at data and measuring also things from across your organization and finding nothing that needs improvement or should be looked at, then you're probably not looking at the right things, or you've made it far too easy for yourself. So you need to show that you've used the data, okay? When we're looking at meeting minutes, when we're looking at logs like fire drill logs, behavior support management logs, you want to make sure they are up to date and you have a record of them going back, probably minimum a quarter if you're new. The more you have, the better it's going to be, okay? So I would, when you're assessing and preparing and organizing to go through the process, take note of certain things. One thing I would do is not just, as you're organizing and preparing to assign staff, and maybe you've assigned staff but you haven't actually given them the work and the due dates yet, go through the sections. Look at the evidence tables, okay? Look for the standards in the evidence where there's time frames there. Look for where there's meetings and things like logs and records, and make a note of those. Make a note where the fundamental practice standards are. So they're on your radar. Meeting minutes should be again complete, up to date. If there's something, or if early on you identify some standards where timeframes are asked for, or meeting minutes or logs are asked for, and you don't have anything in place yet, that standard is not implemented, it's not even, not even on the drawing board yet, get them on the drawing board. You don't want to go into the site visit and not have any record of those groups meeting or those logs being completed, okay? Overall, records of all types should be maintained safely, depending if they're confidential. You need to be thinking about the access on a need-to-know basis for some of those, and they should be complete, at least to the extent to which the standards require them to be. All right? And as you are doing facilities, and we're going to run out of time, but as you can see from if you've got the slides in front of you, in some of these areas, I've got additional slides that really go into more detail. You can use those yourself after the training and look at that. And if you have questions, you can ask me. Facilities, they're going to walk around and look, and there's a number of facilities standards, right? In ASC, there's a number of them, safety issues, and if you have residential facilities, certainly they're going to be looking at a lot of different issues. Training, if the standards are asking that your staff be trained, you're going to have to show that they've been trained. Plans to train are generally not going to be sufficient to pass the standard. If you've got most of your staff trained or well on their way to being trained, say at the site visit, right, because you understand the process, that you'll have another 2.5 to 3 months before you have, after the site visit to prepare your report. So even if you don't pass the standard because you've got, not all, the training isn't done, you'll still have another 3 months to get it done. So plan for that and make sure it gets done. There's a tool in the Tools Index under Training and Supervision that lists all the standards in the Administration and Management and Service Delivery Administration sections that ask for training. And there's a number of different places. The Training and Supervision is the least of it. There's standards in PQI about training, standards in the Administration and Service Environment about training, standards in BSM about training, and RPM about training. So this collects them all, and you can see in one place and use those worksheets to see who's got what. And if training isn't done, and you can begin to start to plan, and we got so-and-so coming in to do the training on whatever date, and it goes a long way to show that if you're going to bring somebody in from the outside, it goes a long way to show that you've already have a contract with that person. So even though the training isn't yet done, it's clear that the training will be done on the given dates. Was there another question about that, Jacqueline, about training? Training is obviously big, and again, the worksheet can be, I think, can be very, very helpful. And personnel records, I think the single best source of getting ready for the personnel records being reviewed is the personnel records worksheet that is in the Tools Index and in the guidelines. It's a peer tool. It lists all the different things that the standards are going to ask about personnel records. So it's all there, and you either have it or you don't, right? And that's the thing about the process. This is an open book test, and you have all the answers. You know what the standards ask for. You know what evidence is going to be required. You know how you'll be evaluated on a 1, 2, 3, 4 scale. And on any given standard, you should be able to look at it and say we're there or we're not there, right? Now, let me just look at Jacqueline's book electronic and a hard copy. Well, again, the question is, if you've got this data you want to show the reviewers on a website or in your computer system, the question is, are you just going to let them loose and look around, or are you going to have somebody sitting there the whole time, which is reasonable, because this is obviously an incredibly important event, to go find them. A lot of these document reviews will be done on Sundays, so you'll need to have somebody there on Sunday to do this, and at least available throughout the site visit. So one of the thing to do is talk to the peer team. About 6 weeks before the site visit, you will be in contact with the peer team, and from that point forward, you can contact the team leader with your questions. And so if you have any questions about documents, at that point, they're the person to speak to, and you can work that out. If you think the peer team is being unreasonable with a request, then definitely call us, and we'll see if there's really an issue there. So here's a couple more slides. Policies. If we require a policy, you must have evidence that it was reviewed by the board and approved by the board. If that has not been done, then you won't pass on that standard. Here's a slide about procedures, case records. Basically with case records, you want to look at the expectations in RPM 7 and also any additional expectations in the services. RPM 702, which is the basic standard that lists a lot of what's on this slide, is one of the top 10 most rated out standards that we have. So you want to pay a special attention to that. Here's a slide that lists many, not all, but many of the standards, the issues related to facilities, whether it's medication storage or fire drill logs or your monthly facility maintenance reports. You want to check all of that. And finally, here's a PQI bottom line type slide. All right. Do you have any questions? While you're pulling your questions together, I'll remind you, you'll get a certificate in the next couple of days. It will include a link to a survey, which I would really like it if you took the survey. If you've been around us for a while and you were filling out surveys like last summer, this one is a lot shorter. So please do that. And if there are other staff with you, say you're on speakerphone, and they want credit for having taken this training and a certificate, and many people want that for professional development purposes, they want copies put in their personnel files, etc., then you need to send me their first name, their last name, their email address, and the name of the organization. If you send me all 4 of those, I'll be able to register them after the fact, and they will be listed as an attendee. Well, we're at 2. Any additional thoughts? Feel free to contact me directly if you have questions. What I'll do is I'll end the audio, and I'll leave Ionic open for another few minutes. But at this point, probably best to just ask me directly, through my email. Okay, well, I hope this was helpful, and if it wasn't, let me know. And so have a great day. I'll talk to you next time. Bye.